Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast, where we continue our off-season asset rankings. A heated debate to start the show. Donte DiVincenzo versus Josh Hart. Who's more valuable to the Knicks, but more importantly, who's more valuable around the league?
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We want you to get started as an everyday, or if you want to listen to this podcast day in and day out, because we're coming to you 5 times a week. We're finishing up these asset rankings, and it's probably going to be all draft going forward. Lots and lots and lots of goodies on who the Knicks could potentially pick with their 2 first-round picks. So you should definitely subscribe and hit the notifications bell to ensure you never miss an episode. And then when you're on the go and you're taking a walk and you're taking a jog and you're a little creep and you want us in your ear, be sure to hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast platform of choice, so we're with you at all times as human Knicks-themed security blankets. But who will you have that codependent relationship with? I'm Gavin, Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. He's Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. Alex, we're continuing where we left off yesterday. So just in case people missed yesterday's article, I'll restate the premise, hopefully in a clearer, more concise way than I did yesterday. But we do this every single year. It is a Knicks asset ranking. And essentially, we spend so much time talking about fake trades. I always think it's a useful exercise to establish, all right, like how much value do these guys actually have around the league, and try to be as objective as possible, because I think even though I consider us both fairly unbiased sources, there's always a tendency to overvalue your own guys. 2 guys who I think from a Knicks perspective, it's hard to overvalue: Donte DiVincenzo and Josh Hart. And Alex, the team that I kept coming back to, a team that you referenced, I think, in regard to maybe Julius Randle the other day, the San Antonio Spurs. I was just saying, like, man, like I kind of think they would give up 2 first-round picks, possibly for either of these guys. And it sort of got my gears turning. Like, should I have them even higher up my list? Because they were sort of both middle of the pack for me. But if you're a team that has aspirations of like just getting serious about playing winning basketball, like even the Houston Rockets are another great example. Why wouldn't you want either of these 2 players on your team?
Yeah, I kind of fall in that category too. I mean, and I started making the case last episode, but I'll make it again. I think, especially in DiVincenzo's case, I think that he's on one of the most valuable contracts in the NBA now. Like, he is guaranteed to never make 10% of your salary cap this entire contract that he signed. And he just finished the first year of it. He's got 3 more years to go. The most he's ever going to make on this deal is like, I think, a shade under $13 million. I mean, it's a huge steal. He's, again, I'll say it again. I said it last episode, but like, he can only be mentioned with Steph Curry and Luka Doncic as far as prolific 3-point shooters this year. And he spent the first quarter of the season barely playing, like only playing like 10 minutes a game behind Quentin Grimes, and, kind of establishing himself before Grimes eventually fell out of the rotation. Donte took his job. So I guess that kind of underscores just how crazy of a run Donte went on to end the season. I mean, I just think every team in the NBA is going to want that level of 3-point shooting, especially because it's not coming attached to someone who is a negative on defense. Like, I wouldn't say that he's an overwhelming positive on defense, but DiVincenzo can certainly stay in front of his man most of the time. He's not going to like consistently lose you possessions unless he's against like one of the elite players in the NBA, which, anyone short of like OG Anunoby is not going to be able to bottle up all that often without some help defense. So that's more on the coach at that point to kind of scheme that out. But, I think that DiVincenzo, to me, comes in right below. I mean, we sort of differed on where we had guys listed in the last episode in relation to some of the draft picks and stuff. And, I think we both had DiVincenzo soundly below the 2028 to 31 picks that the Knicks have. And that's where I'm at. Although, like what you just said, I sort of question that even. I almost wonder if he would get you 2 first-round picks from the right team, because I just think that 3-point shooting is so valuable. Hart, I mean, kind of does similar stuff in terms of overall what he adds to winning, although obviously in a very different way, with the rebounding that's, outsized for his physical size. We saw the 3-point shooting actually came through in the playoffs this year, which was great. which was different than last year and was the one thing that we were sort of holding against him after last year's playoffs. And can't really do that anymore, at least not after how he played this year. And then obviously such a warrior, played so many minutes and so many games. He's just kind of like the ultimate glue guy, I think, at this point. Yeah, I have them pretty close, but I think the ultimate differentiator for me when I had DiVincenzo ahead of Hart in my rankings is just the fact that DiVincenzo makes a significant chunk less of money. Like Hart will be making over $20 million at some point in his deal, which is not a deal breaker, but is also, I'd say that that's roughly, give or take a couple million, like pretty fair value for him, although he gives you great value for that amount of money. I just think Donte DiVincenzo will never not be a huge steal of a contract, which makes him way more valuable in this new luxury tax era, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you on all of that. Frankly, I had DiVincenzo one spot ahead of Hart, mostly because of the contract number, and mostly just because I think at the end of the day, teams just value shooting in the playoffs to such an absurd extent, and like a rightful extent, because that is the one thing that Hart, at least on paper, took off the table. And until this year's playoffs, where like when you left him wide open, you dared him to beat you. Like 2 years ago, that cost the Knicks a series. This year, that won the Knicks a series. So that was sort of the big jump in his game. But having like a high volume 3-point shooter, and like the biggest thing with Donte is like weren't wide open shots towing the line. They weren't off the dribble, but they were like usually like coming off ball, like coming off a screen, catch and shoot from 27, 28 feet away. Like they were high degree of difficulty threes. And you were getting into this yesterday, but what he showed like as an off the dribble scorer and like that stretch where he put up 27 points per game over 6 games pre-All-Star break with Jalen Brunson out, like there might even be more on tap there. Like let's just say DiVincenzo went to the Charlotte Hornets tomorrow. Like I think he's probably a pretty efficient 20-point scorer in the NBA next year, and like comparable at least offensively to like someone like JJ Redick at like the absolute peak of his career, and an even better athlete around the rim, and like even more burst to the rim, and then defensively like some of the help side shot blocking he had in the playoffs was just so impressive. And Hart, like I would be so fascinated to see which team would trade for him and how much they would give up. Obviously, I never want him off the Knicks, but the guy just is just a winner at this point, right? And teams, I think the separator why the Knicks only got him for Cam Reddish in a first was he had never been seen in the playoffs before, and now that we've seen, like, all right, it more than translates. Like he picks up his game in some ways. I think the right team, the right contender, and even a team that just sort of needs that veteran bump. Like I think he would have incredible value as a culture setter. Fortunately, I don't think either of those two guys are getting traded anytime soon, and they might even have more value to the Knicks because of the Jalen Brunson connection than any other team in the league. Alex, on my list, we already went over him. I had Deuce McBride below both these two guys. We don't really need to belabor that point. Maybe the last guy we could go over, unless you want to save this for next segment, Mitchell Robinson, who I'll leave it to you, but I think it is a fascinating conversation in terms of both his production, but why we don't really, or we punish him more for his injury history than we do someone like OG Anunoby, who we both had at second.
Well, I'll just give a quick bit on Isaiah Hartenstein first, because I actually had him below Donte and Josh Hart, which I was a little lower on him than you were. So I'll just give a quick spiel on that. And then next segment, we can get into Mitch and Bojan Bogdanovic and some of the rest of these picks and kind of how we feel about those. But I'll just say in regards to Hartenstein, I think the reason I actually had him below the 2027 and 2026 unprotected first as well. I think it's just because I can't see a team giving up an unprotected first for him. Like, I think that he is one of those guys, if you want to talk about guys that are more valuable to the Knicks than possibly 2/3 of the league, I think that Hartenstein might be that guy. I think he's a phenomenal player. And I think that for a team that needs, the offensive rebounding and the touch around the rim that he offers and the passing out of the high post and stuff like that. I mean, you could say that like every team could utilize that in some way, but I don't know that every team is going to utilize him as much as the Knicks do. And I think that a lot of teams,
real quick to that point, the Knicks didn't utilize him like that way for a year almost.
Yeah, for sure. And like didn't use his passing nearly as much. And honestly, had him playing more like he was playing on the Clippers to begin last year, which is why we were like ready to get him out of town. in the first half of his first season with the Knicks until things kind of clicked and he became the player that he is now. I think a lot of teams now are looking for shooting out of that 5 spot. So like, there's just a lot of teams that wouldn't be interested in his particular skill set because they would be like, well, that's going to clog up the paint. Like if you have a superstar on your team that is not a particularly perimeter oriented guy, like I think of like the Bucks, for example. Like if you have like a Giannis on your team, you don't want an Isaiah Hartenstein. And maybe that's sort of a unique situation. Like he's kind of one of the last superstars that is kind of like getting by without much of a 3-point shot and still being dominant. So maybe that's a unique situation, but I just think there are teams that would either consider themselves set enough at center that they wouldn't want to like pay an upcharge to get an Isaiah Hartenstein, or just he wouldn't fit with them stylistically, that I don't think that he would carry as much value as like a Josh Hart or a Donte DiVincenzo, who I think could fit seamlessly on pretty much any team in the NBA, which is why I think that at this point their value, especially for Hart, like I think has gone up pretty significantly compared to when he got traded to the Knicks. And we don't really know what Dante's trade value is at this point, but I would be willing to bet that some team out there would give at least like one unprotected pick like that year, plus like a protected one in a future year or something like that for Donte, if they thought that he was a piece to take them like to a championship, which maybe that's the case for Hartenstein too.
No, it's a great argument. And I think Hartenstein is specific. I think the case I was trying to make yesterday is that we know of a team that would trade multiple firsts, maybe multiple good firsts for him. That's the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Would they do that?
I mean, they have like 22 picks. That's like, if they see someone who is just unequivocally a great fit, and I would say Hartenstein is that for them, I think they have this luxury that pretty much no other team in the league has. Maybe the Jazz, where they can say like, this is objectively an overpay, but we're going to do it. I'm not saying 2 unprotected first, but I think 2 good firsts like could be on the table for them if they say, hey, that's a piece and we have 18 of these, so we're just going to go ahead and do it.
Maybe. To me, it just kind of seems like they're just willing and ready to throw money at him, which is different, I think, than being like, I would give up picks for this guy. Like, I think if all it costs you is money, you do it. And you can outbid the Knicks or whatever. But I don't know, like if the Knicks re-signed Hartenstein and like once it hits December 15th or whatever, when he's eligible to be traded, I would be pretty surprised if like there was any report that was like, yeah, Oklahoma City came by and they were offering like 2 first-round picks for him. Like I feel like they would be like, we can address that in a different way. Like we can draft someone or we can sign someone or someone else or whatever. And that maybe they won't be as good as Hartenstein, but we don't have to give up our precious draft picks for it, because that's just how the Thunder operate. But that's probably a whole other discussion. And there's no indication that we should be worried about anything other than just the looming possibility of them signing him with just money at this point anyway. So it's probably a moot discussion.
I agree with that, because it would I said it yesterday. He should, if he stays with the Knicks, full stop, no trade clause is what I'm asking for. It was his agent. If I'm the Knicks, I'm saying, yeah, that's fair. No worries. We will move on to Mitchell Robinson next on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we got to let you know about our good friends over at FanDuel. And summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, which maybe by the time you're listening to this might be over, and more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. And you know who's definitely hitting one out of the park right now? Grimace. The Mets. The Mets are currently up. Let's see. At the time that we're recording this, I think they were up like 12-2 now over the Texas Rangers in the first game of that series. So tomorrow, as of right this second on FanDuel, they're at minus 1.5, where a $5 bet would get you about 1.5 times back. So, or about 50% extra back. So a $5 bet would get you $760 back. So I don't know. The Grimace Mets, man, ever since Grimace threw out the first pitch, pretty tough to bet against them. So I would go ahead and bet the Grimace Mets until they lose, because this is going to be like win 6 in a row, I think. So as long as I didn't just jinx them and they lose a 10-run lead, which would be the most Mets thing ever. Anyway, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep talking through our list here. And yeah, we've reached Mitchell Robinson in this discussion. And maybe it's a good opportunity to say, and I don't know where you stand. I think you've got him above the other picks. I've got Mitch, and maybe I'm being too hard on him, but I think I'm looking at this from the scope of if you're trying to get a trade done potentially on draft night this year, who's going to carry the most value, what's going to carry the most value before you get into the new league year. So I actually had Mitch below Milwaukee's first next year, the 2025 unprotected first of the Knicks, and then picks 24 and 25 this year. Now, that's not to say that I think that Mitch is less valuable than a guy that the Knicks could take at 24 or 25, or some other team could take at 24 or 25. But I do wonder if his value is maybe at the lowest that it's kind of ever been right now. Like, we saw just how much of an impact he can have at the beginning of this year. We were talking about, hey, maybe he'll be up for defensive player of the year or all defensive team nomination, like by the time the year ends, because he was that impactful on the glass and on defense and patrolling the paint. And he came back from his injury eventually and recaptured some of that, didn't fully recapture it, which I think is part of my reservation. But I also just think unfortunately his injury history will probably start affecting him in terms of if the Knicks are looking to move him at this point. And we've seen guys with injury histories. There's one on the Knicks, for example, right now who, I would argue that the Knicks were able to get OG Anunoby for the price point that they did this year, in part because the last number of years he hasn't really been able to stay healthy. And then that kind of bore fruit again this year. Even if it was kind of a freak thing with the bone spur in his elbow. But, I think those things, as guys progress in their career, start to eat at them more and more as far as how other teams value them. And I wonder if that would affect Mitch. And then also, to my point that I was just making about Hartenstein a minute ago, would Mitch with his style of play be as valuable to any team that's not the Knicks? And maybe you could argue again, like maybe to Oklahoma City, it would work well. And there's maybe a fistful of other teams that might be like, oh, he would be a solid contributor for us. But I think on a lot of teams around the NBA, he might kind of fit the same role that he fit with the Knicks which is being behind whoever the starting center is at this point. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that maybe his value might be a little lower than it's been previously at this point, even if he's also on kind of a decent value contract as well, making only like $12-13 million.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I bet if you were to look at the average number of games Mitchell Robinson and OG Anunoby have missed in their careers, and maybe I should have tried to do the math real quick there, I would bet OG's maybe even slightly more injury prone, and because that is kind of the ultimate definition of it, right? Like, how many games do you miss? Like, bottom line, that Mitch is. I think the perception, though, is that Mitch is more fragile because he is a 7-foot plus guy with a naturally lean build who's still just all arms and legs, and you're almost wincing and just kind of waiting for something bad to happen with him at all times. And every time he falls, you're kind of like just praying, like, all right, get up, get up, get up. Where I think OG almost benefits from the opposite, where he is 6'8" and just built like a freaking tank. And you are kind of shocked when he gets hurt. And you shouldn't be, because his track record is like pretty constantly getting hurt. But I think something that is saving his value as a player, and the fact, like we were just talking before the show started, like, all right, is another team going to just even try to blow the Knicks out of the water in terms of their offer to Anunoby, saying, hey, we don't care about the injury, we're just going to give you the most money we possibly can. Part of it is that he's a better player than Mitch, and he does it not in a more valuable position, but OG is the best wing defender, or like certainly in the conversation for the best wing defender in basketball. Mitchell Robinson is probably just outside that top tier, like top 3-4 guys in terms of rim protection defensively. So maybe that's the separator, but I think he gets a little bit of an unfair rap. And again, like, this might've just been a difference in approach between us. I was looking for peak value here, right? Because the phrase I keep coming back to is it only takes one team. I do think there's a team out there that would give up a pretty high first round pick for Mitchell Robinson and recognize that, hey, again, like over the first 14 games last year, we're talking about someone who was a top 10 defender in basketball. I think he probably was playing more like a top 5 defender in basketball and is a one-man offensive rebounding wrecking crew. But he is a very specific flavor palette, right? Like, Like you have to be like, I don't know, people, my girlfriend's like this, people who like peanut butter and pickle sandwiches. I'm kind of maybe outing her as a weirdo right now, but that is sort of what Mitchell Robinson is as an NBA player, right? Only 1 in 30 love it, but the people who love it really love it because like you're limiting your offense. He's parked right in front of the rim. So I do think it's a fascinating debate because first round picks, like whether it's the Knicks low first round picks, whether it's the Pistons pick, whether it's the Wizards pick, whether it's the Bucks pick, those are universally valuable. I just think like the apex that Mitch could get is probably a little bit better than those things. And I personally, for the Knicks, I would value Mitchell Robinson than any of those assets, even though I know that's not the conversation, but it's an interesting one because I think so much goes into it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, before we, now that we've gone through the Mitch part, I think we have the back half of all these other assets to go through. So I think we'll go through that in our final segment, including Bojan Bogdanovic. I mean, where does he stand as far as just he's a valuable expiring contract? It still has some game left to him, clearly, as we saw down the stretch with the Knicks. So where does he stand? Where do some of the other picks that the Knicks have stand? What other picks do they have? Which, by the way, I did go over the whole list at the top of the first part of this episode. So feel free to go back and listen to that. But we're going to get into all those in just a second on Locked On Knicks.
Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, so moving on from Mitchell Robinson, Alex, I'll throw this back to you. The Pistons pick, the Wizards pick, the Bucks pick, the 24th pick, the 25th pick. Those were my next five, and that was the exact order I had them in. My logic is like the Pistons pick has that extra year to convert to the Knicks, and I think there's a chance 3 years down the road the Pistons are just decent enough that the Knicks get a lottery pick out of it. The Wizards, it would have to be in the next 2 seasons, unless I'm misremembering that. That does not seem very likely that that ever becomes a first round pick for the Knicks, because I think they are really, really operating on a very slow rebuild timeline here. The Bucks one maybe should even be ahead of the Wizards pick for that logic, because it will almost definitely turn into a first round pick and will almost definitely turn into a first round pick for the Knicks. The only way it doesn't is if Milwaukee somehow is a top 5 pick next year, which to your point, they have zero incentive. Even if Giannis were like basketball gods forbid, because we want to see that guy on the court, even if it hurts the Knicks, he's just that good of a player. If he was out for the season a few games into the year, like with what they have and all the vets they have and zero incentive to tank because they would not keep it, that pick would convert to the Pelicans if it were top 5. I can't really imagine a scenario where that's not a first round pick. And then the 24th and 25th pick this year, maybe I'm underrating them just because like they're immediate and you can get someone right away. And we all know on draft night teams kind of get big eyes, big stomachs, and they want to grab someone. How did you have those 5 ranked?
Yeah, I had the Milwaukee pick tops among those picks because I just think with a whole season of Doc Rivers and a team that's not getting any younger, and a team that had its various tumults this year, I think there's a chance that's a top 20 pick. I don't think it's like a lotto pick or something, but I could see, the Bucks, if max turmoil hits next year, they could be like a 6-7 seed, which would put them, just inside that 20th pick ranking, which is solid. I think that's a solid pick, and any team would line up to potentially have that, and have a chance to draft a guy who falls just outside the lottery or whatever. Then I have the Knicks' own 2025 pick unprotected next. And then I had this year's 24th and 25th picks before both the Washington and Detroit picks. I just think thanks to all those protections, a lot of teams I think we're seeing I feel like if those picks were valuable, the Knicks might have traded them by now. In one of these deals, and save themselves trading one of their young players or something, save themselves trading Quentin Grimes or trading Emmanuel Quickly, if it could have saved them that or something like that. I think they would have done that, but I just don't think those picks carry a ton of weight yet because there's just so much uncertainty about if they're even going to convert as first round picks. They almost, to me, especially like, the Washington one, it almost feels like a first round pick in name only. It feels like that one's probably destined to turn into 2 second rounders. The Detroit one, maybe there's a chance it turns into like the 13th pick or something if they show some improvement, but they've got a long way to go. I mean, they're having full upheaval in their front office this year, and they have a coach who was ineffectual this year, and just it's not a great situation there in Detroit. So I don't have huge faith in that. The pick 24 and 25 this year, though, I do think are a little more valuable to me just because of the nature of this draft. It seems like this is a very good role player draft. So if I was a team that was looking to get better, I would probably look at those 24th and 25th picks and be like, well, these might be weirdly, even though the top picks this year are not worth nearly what the top picks in another draft are worth, the 24th and 25th pick this year might be worth more like a mid-teens pick in another year because there's just so much parity in the amount of talent that there is throughout the entire first round and into the second round in this year's draft that, like, if you feel confident in your scouts and in your draft board, then if you have the 24th and 25th pick, you're probably saying to yourself, like, I think we might get 2 rotation players here. Like, I think there's a lot of older players that have limited ceilings, but pretty high floors in this draft from what I've seen. So to me, that's why I had those ranked a little higher than the Washington Detroit picks. I also just think that, like, again, I was looking at this sort of through the lens of the Knicks possibly agreeing to a deal on draft night that they either commence right before the start of the new league year or immediately at the beginning of the new league year. And if that happened, I think that there would be a little more value to the picks that are in the now to be like, hey, you get to make a pick tonight, for a player that you want. And we'll take your player back that we're getting in trade, but you get to make like one new addition to your team, one new rookie right this second. And I think that would bear a little more weight than like saying, oh, you get maybe a first round pick from Washington in a couple of years. So that's sort of where I landed on that as far as ranking those.
Thinking it through, I would have the Wizards pick last. I think I don't think that's going to be a first round pick. All right, let's talk Bojan, and I think that the other player assets that we have left are the rights to Rokas, Precious Achiuwa, and I guess that's on the qualifying offer for him, which I think is about $6 million, and Alec Burks. But I want to focus on Bojan first because I think he is like so much of this conversation is theoretical because outside of Julius Randle, like they are just not particularly likely to trade any one of these guys specifically. If there is a star trade, you could certainly see Deuce in there. You could see Mitch in there. You're probably not going to trade Brunson. Probably, like, if they're lucky enough to keep Anunoby and Hartenstein, probably not going to trade those guys. Probably not going to trade Donte or Josh. I say all that to say I think Bojan is pretty clear cut the guy that is most likely to be going out this offseason. What do you make of his value around the league? Like at $19 million, like, will teams perceive that as a positive and say, like, all right, this is still a guy who's a year removed from scoring an efficient 20 points per game and certainly look capable of helping the Knicks in the playoffs if he had stayed healthy? Or do you more so look at it as this is something the Knicks are going to have to attach an asset to get off, assuming they want to do an even money exchange for a player that they perceive to have more on the court value this year?
I guess it would just depend on who the player is that you're sending him out for. I don't think that like any team is looking at Bojan and being like, this is a guy that we gotta go after. I mean, the Knicks didn't even really look at him like that valuable this year. You know what I mean? Like, essentially, they traded Evan Fournier and Quentin Grimes, and Grimes was struggling mightily with the Knicks and then struggled mightily with the Pistons. So maybe they kind of just finally reached a point where they were like, this experiment is over. Like, let's just get NBA players in here because we're trying to make a playoff run this year. And, so from the Bojan perspective there, like they treated him like a positive this year, but not a huge one. They didn't give up a ton for him. And I think that's roughly how he would get viewed around the league. I don't think that he's so much just a chunk of salary that he's like Evan Fournier levels, where it's like this guy is like actively bad. And like doesn't really have anything left anymore other than just the ability to shoot standstill 3-pointers. But I do think that, he would come out roughly neutral in most trades. Like, I think that if, for example, This is something maybe we'll talk about at another point this week. Like Paul George's name came up, for example, the other day in connection to possibly being someone the Knicks might be interested in. And if they were interested in making a trade for him and they had to, like, Bojan would be the salary piece number one for that. You'd probably include Mitchell Robinson and then just guarantee the deals of all the rest of the end of bench guys and send all them out, plus like a pick or something. In that scenario, I think that like the Clippers would look at that and say, well, we're still going to hold on to Kawhi Leonard, and we still, we're so leveraged at this point with these guys that like we have to still try to sort of win. And I think they would look at Bojan and be like, well, he can still score. So as long as we can build a good defensive foundation around him, we could still throw him out there for 20 minutes a game. And he's still an NBA player for sure. And even on the Knicks, like once he kind of learned what his role was on defense, we saw like he made some nice quick hands plays and stuff like that. Like he's not going to keep anyone in front of him too well, but he'll get his hand in there. He'll strip some balls away. He'll, play the passing lane every once in a while. Like he's got good instincts. So I think most teams would look at him that way. They would be like, it's not a pure disaster sell move to acquire him, but it's also not like a huge win to get him. So that's kind of where I had him ranked pretty low. Like I had him ranked below all the first. I had him even ranked below the rights to Jokic Jokibitis, who hasn't played yet in the NBA, but I think, you can reasonably look at and be like, I feel like he's going to be a decent NBA player, and he's in his early 20s. So like you have a long time to figure that out. I just think mostly Bojan's, he's very valuable from the perspective to the Knicks that he'd be a huge salary to execute a big trade. But as far as just actual tangible value to another team, he's a guy at the tail end of his career. He can score. That's most of it. That's most of what he does. And that's pretty much it. So I don't think he carries like huge value around the league, but he's not a huge negative either, which is good.
Yeah. I'm in agreement on that. You had Rokas Jokibitis a little higher than me, and it just kind of got my gears turning because I think I kind of put him in there and didn't put a ton of thought into it, but I'm fascinated to see what his value is around the league. And I wonder, like, if the Knicks were to make an all-in type trade, like, obviously he's not going to be the centerpiece of something like that, but could he be a nice throw-in for a team, assuming the Knicks, and presumably they do, prefer, like, and strongly prefer to keep Deuce McBride on the contract they have, and Deuce, even if, as I noted, is not a pure point guard, have him as just a known entity on this team, how he fits versus Rokas, who like could be very good, but you don't exactly know what it's going to look like in the NBA as a throw into that type of deal. But do you think like that would make a difference, is like a little bit of extra sprinkling on top in a star deal? Or do you think like if he ultimately comes over, it's probably just going to be on the Knicks because it's been such a long time since he was drafted at this point?
I think his value has only gone up since he got drafted. Yeah, honestly. I mean, he's won two. No, he didn't end up winning the second one. I don't think he won at least one of the Rising Star Award in the EuroLeague, which is a pretty prestigious award. Like every single one of the guys that has won that award for the last like 2 decades, I don't know, however long, has come into the NBA and made an impact. Like it's been a lot of really good players have won that award. So, it's not something to be taken lightly, I don't think. I mean, Luka Doncic won it. I believe back-to-back years. Bogdan Bogdanovic won it. I know Nikola Mirotic won it. It's someone else that I'm forgetting. But, there's been like some pretty big names that have won that award and then come over and made some noise in the NBA. So I think the fact that he's reached that point and the fact that he's managed to snatch pretty decent playing time on a European team in his early 20s are both pretty big selling points for him to the NBA. And, I think that like if he with his resume entered the draft today, I feel like he'd probably be, I mean, especially in this draft, he'd probably be in consideration for a top 20 pick. I mean, there would be a chance some team might be like, yeah, that's our guy right there. Cause like he's crafty. I think probably the main concern would be defense, but like he has good size. He has great passing ability. He's shown off the dribble shooting ability, shown the ability to break down a defense. I mean, I think there's a lot to like about him. So I definitely think that there's a chance to like, if the Knicks had a big deal and it lined up and, it's like, we're at like the 2-yard line, we need to just push this over, that if you said like, okay, you can have Rokas Jokibitis, that team might be like, oh, hell yeah. Like that's a guy that we want to bring over and give a role and see what he can do. So yeah, I think he's definitely he's worth more than the pick that he was taken with. That's for damn sure. Like he's definitely worth more than like the 36th pick at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, you want to wrap up? Any thoughts on I'll just say this: I didn't include any second round picks beyond this year. I know you had a quick mention of the Nets and Pistons picks, which is wise because they're both valuable. My bottom three were Precious, the 38th pick, and then I had Alec Burks. Maybe you can even make a case for Alec Burks given what he did. He was a good playoff player for the Knicks against all odds. A little bit higher. Precious, like his value around the league. I think there are smart franchises out there. Maybe only 2 or 3 of them who saw what Precious did during that stretch where Mitch was out and Hartenstein was hampered and said, this guy is probably an above average backup center in this league, even though he's undersized for that position. And a good fit especially in more aggressive defensive schemes than what the Knicks play. So I think there's a smart team out there that would look at Precious and see like maybe like a bottom first round pick, which is essentially where I have him on there. The 38th pick is fine. Burks is whatever. He's kind of a throw-in at this point, probably again more valuable to the Knicks than most other teams because Tom Thibodeau loves him and he gets superpowers in the second round of the playoffs against the Indiana Pacers. But any final thoughts, Alex, before we wrap this one up?
I'll just say with regard to the Brooklyn and Detroit seconds, I just have them above any other seconds because they're both next year, 2025. I assume both those teams are going to be bad again. And if that's the case, I mean, we saw this year that can work as sort of a substitute late first round pick, which we saw in the OG Anunoby deal where the Knicks didn't have to give up any first round picks, but they did eventually give up the Detroit second round pick, which is like the closest thing you can get to another first round pick. So that I don't think either Brooklyn or Detroit are going to be particularly good next year. So I could just see those being a little more valuable. But yeah, I think that wraps up our asset rankings. I think some pretty good discussions about where certain players fit in, where picks fit in. Of course, again, reminder, if you didn't watch the first part of this episode, go back, whether you're on YouTube or on your pod feed, and just go listen to the previous episode too, where we talked about Jalen Brunson and the obviousness of his case. We talked about a better explainer of all the picks that the Knicks own, in case you're curious about that. Talked to OG Anunoby. We were a little differing in where we had Julius Randle and Deuce McBride. So we talked about that some. So some really good discussions in that first part too. But until next time, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.